and none of this might not have happened. But anyhow, the limo driver pulls up right in front of that large entryway to the Dakota building, and they get out, and he's essentially blocking not only the view of what was about to happen, but from any other cars getting in or out of that driveway there. And so John, Yoko gets out and John gets out, and all of that happens, and apparently the limo is still parked there. So that would be another witness. First of all, whoever that driver was of that limo would be a witness. And second of all, the cops supposedly came 2 minutes after that and put John in the car, in their squad car. Well, if it was such a dire scene right there, they could have put John in that limo and taken him away. And there's no mention of where that limo went, who the limo driver was. He could have been interviewed. He would have had the perfect eyewitness view of exactly what happened that evening, because he had just literally dropped them off. And you also have to remember this whole entire scene was in a span of like 10 minutes. So Mark David Chapman supposedly started firing at like 10:54. And John Lennon was pronounced dead at the hospital at like 11:12. So we're talking 11, 12, 15 minutes total this entire thing happened in. So it, just right in succession. It was almost like it was just put right into place. Shots fired, police on the scene, suspect arrested, Lennon's at the hospital, Lennon pronounced dead. They made the announcement on the Monday night football game, which at 11:30, I mean, that must have been a really long game for them to have announced it at Monday Night Football at 11:30, 11:45 at night, so this was all so fast and so rapid, and they seemed to have all of the information, and they knew exactly who did it and how many shots were fired and how he died and all of these things within minutes. It's just amazing. But that limo driver, I just don't understand how that question has never been raised. He was right, or he or she, I don't know, but right there in front of the scene, blocking the scene, had first, a perfect view of exactly everything that happened, and not even maybe just that, since there was no investigation, but almost everybody else has made money off of this story, right? He's never given an account. He's never given an interview. We don't even know his name. We don't even know if the limo was the Lennons or from the record plant, or where it even came from.
Yeah.
So it's very, very, very strange that that question has never been raised, and nobody seems to know, who that person was, or where the limo went afterwards, or where it came from in the first place. So it's like the mystery driver.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really good work there, Desiree, because I've never come across that. It's on your website, Number 9 blog. I've never seen the limo driver mentioned anywhere else, and so yeah, bizarre, isn't it? You would have thought if someone wanted to cash in, I was, with the headline reading, I was there, I saw what happened, you'd think they'd want to cash in on it, but
right.
What's going on? Why the silence?
Right.
I just want to tie up another loose end, and it's what I was talking about earlier with regards to Hawaii and the suicide attempt, Mark David Chapman's suicide attempt. So yeah, what was basically going, and this will kind of maybe explain where he got the money to go on this round the world trip that you were talking about, Desiree. Basically, what happened the thing with Mark David Chapman was he like I said earlier, he was a bit of a coaster. He'd have one job, then he'd drop out, then he'd get another job, then he'd drop out, and then he'd get another job, and he was doing this all across the US, and he was trying to get this university degree so he could get the permanent job at the YMCA instead of just being a camp counselor, that he could, instead of that, be a permanent employee. But it never happened. It just didn't work out. He kept dropping out of college and not following his studies properly, and life wasn't working out for him. So what he decided to do was to go to Hawaii and to start a new life in Hawaii. He thought, well, the mainstream version of events tells us that he thought to himself, hey, why don't I try Hawaii? You know, nice weather, you know, tropical type scenery, different scene. Maybe it'll lift me out of my bad spirits and I'll be able to get a job and so on and so on. But it didn't quite work out that way, and he fell into this depression. And this would have been around 1977. And as we mentioned earlier, he tried to he contemplated suicide, and he actually went ahead and tried to commit suicide, so we're told. And what he did was he got a hose and attached it to his car exhaust and placed it inside the car. And apparently what happened was the hose burned, it melted, and it was a failed attempt. And he hooked up with by this point, he'd actually already hooked up with a psychiatric social worker. He'd been assigned with a psychiatric social worker because before the suicide attempt, he'd actually called a suicide hotline. I think I mentioned this before. But in between the suicide hotline and being assigned with this psychiatric worker, as that was going on, he also tried to commit suicide. But his psychiatric social worker she was interviewed, and she's actually said that maybe he wasn't trying really to kill himself, that it was kind of like attention seeking or a cry for help or something like that. So, but here's the weird thing, okay, and you know, think of mind control here, okay. Now she has actually been interviewed, and she has said that she examined Mark David Chapman after this apparent suicide attempt, and she was determined, or she concluded, I should say, that he wasn't psychotic, he wasn't mentally ill. But she thought, never mind that he isn't mentally ill, she said, she actually admitted him into a psychiatric ward in a hospital, even though he wasn't mentally ill. She thought, what the hell? Let's just, I'm going to admit him anyway to check him over. Right. Now, if you're thinking mind control, maybe that's a little telltale sign there. So we've got here a potential mind control victim who's been placed in a mental institution. Okay. And he stayed there for 2 weeks, and then he was let out, and he got a job there. He was let out and he got a job there as the maintenance man, and then as a junior member of the customer relations department. And it was at this time, I think it was 1978, a year later or a year or so later, that he went on this round the world trip, this very expensive round the world trip. Now, according to mainstream events, whether you want to believe this or not, he got the money as a loan from the hospital, the Castle Memorial Hospital, which is based in Hawaii. The hospital actually gave him a loan to go on this round the world trip. Okay, fine. But as some cynics have asked, yeah, okay, fair enough. But why would you lend so much money? Can you imagine how expensive it would have been? Because Desiree, you've decked out, you've sketched out the actual places that he went to across the world earlier on. Can you imagine how expensive that would have been? You're going to lend money to a man who is a junior maintenance man, who is a junior member of the customer relations department. How is he going to pay that back? Such a huge amount of money for a round the world trip. How is someone on his wage, on his salary, going to ever pay that back?
And not just that, but he was a former patient there. Right. So he probably already owed them money for, I mean, if that's what happened, right? His medical bills and his stay there. So how, why? Makes no sense at all. No sense.
Always more questions than answers.
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
And to take, I mean, you're essentially asking for time off for vacation, and not just time off and vacation, but for them to pay for your entire vacation around the world.
Around the world.
It's just so weird. Like, who would do that?
Like Delhi, Israel, London, was it Holland? Wow, I mean, they're not just like a few places, like round the world, literally.
Right.
At ID Mobile, we don't waste our money on celebrity voiceovers. Why not? I'm a great guy. Numero uno. It's proven by science. Instead, we put our money into giving customers great service, better prices, and fantastic Christmas offers. Like a gift card worth up to £100 on selected handset and SIM-only plans. That's a great deal. Really great deal. That's why ID Mobile is a Which recommended mobile provider. Switch and save today at idmobile.co.uk.
Right, yeah. Geneva, London, Paris, Dublin, Tokyo.
And apparently when
Bangkok.
when he was in London, he was taking in West End shows, and he wasn't,
and he had a lot of art. I don't know if you read anything about that, but he collected very expensive art, like museum quality pieces. Like he had
Salvador Dali. He had an actual
Yes.
Salvador Dali piece. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
does one, accumulate things like that?
Again, apparently, according to the official version of events, that was from he borrowed some money off his mum, who had just got divorced, and it was her divorce settlement, and she lent him the money to buy these loads of paintings. I think one was a Norman Rockwell, I think, as well, who's
Right.
a painter, and yes, Salvador Dali. I'm looking here at the list. I've got the list in front of me. Yeah, just amazing, all these lithographs and things that were thousands
Right.
of dollars.
And it's funny because a lot of when I was reading on this stuff, a lot of these art pieces that he collected, to me, and maybe it's just me, and but resonated a lot with the types of things that Yoko collected. Have you noticed that? And also just his wife was of Japanese descent, like Yoko, and and the around the world trip. So John Lennon took a around the world trip that was kind of similar, just a year prior, or maybe it was a year and a half prior before to his death. He did a very similar trip to that, and Yoko had suggested that he do this, and it was.
Yeah, and he signed on his last day at work when he'd another job that he'd left the Castle Memorial. I think he'd had an argument with one of the staff, or there was a disagreement, and he got a job as a security guard in Hawaii there you go, security guard guard for some apartments. That's his last job before the shooting, security guard for some apartments. And when he signed, so again, there's this correlation between the Dakota and security guards and Padermo, security guard. So apparently when he signed his name out to leave work for the last day when he left, it was John Lennon. He signed out as John Lennon,
right.
Which was noticed afterwards. But yeah, quickly, I just want to say that I've got some reservations about the Padermo thing. So I don't remember actually what we mentioned about Padermo, but I think it was basically the fact that Jose Padermo is said to have been involved in the Bay of Pigs project, which was a CIA US government-backed project to kind of try and overthrow Castro. Jose Padermo is said to have been anti-Castro Cuban exile who was then taken in by the CIA to do this. Now, according to Frank Sturgis, who was a CIA agent, and he was jailed for the Watergate burglaries when the President Nixon linked burglaries of the Democratic Building in 1972, I think it was, or maybe earlier than that, when they a team of Nixon's men burglarized the offices of the Watergate building where the Democrats were based, where they had offices, and they wiretapped and bugged it and burglarized it and so on. So he was jailed for that. Frank Sturgis was a CIA agent, and he was jailed for the Watergate burglaries. Now, he apparently knew a Jose Padermo, and Frank Sturgis claimed that the Jose Padermo that he knew died of natural causes in 1974. And he was going also by the alias of Joaquin Sangenis. And apologies to anyone of Cuban extraction for murdering that pronunciation there. But yeah, I mean, this is according to Frank Sturgis. Do you believe a CIA agent for a start? I mean, would you believe his claims? But this hasn't been corroborated by anyone else. This is according to Frank Sturgis back in the day, that this is what happened to Jose Padermo, a.k.a. Joaquin Sangenis, that he died in 1974.
Just to muddy the waters a bit more.
Just to muddy the waters a bit more. And then it could be that he died, but then again, it could be that he took on an alias. Because apparently there is a Jose Padermo that goes, but the thing is, right? And I'm sorry I'm going off, but it's really confusing to me.